Well, I would say that something incredibly significant just took place right as the U.S. Embassy in Israel celebrated American Independence Day, as it's recorded by Breaking Israel News, who stated that David Friedman said, "This year in Jerusalem," and then drank a glass of wine after saying it. And the significance of that is that every Jew all over the world, at the end of the Passover Seder, they always say, "Next year in Jerusalem," meaning that they hope that they'll be in Jerusalem and that the temple will be rebuilt. Well, did David Friedman just indicate, according to this article, that and these events, that he is clearly saying this year in Jerusalem the temple will be rebuilt in 2019? Let me just read what the article states. The article's titled, "Did Trump's ambassador to Israel call for the third temple to be built in 2019?" By David Sidman, July 3rd, 2019, at 11:09 a.m. from Breaking Israel News. So this was one day before Independence Day. Although July 4th is tomorrow, the U.S. Embassy in Israel preemptively celebrated America's 243rd Independence Day on Tuesday. The gala event was hosted by the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. During his speech, the ambassador David Friedman said, "Leshana haza bi Yerushalayim," this year in Jerusalem. At first glance, saying a phrase like "this year in Jerusalem" may seem like a rather insignificant statement, but those who understand the wider context of the phrase are prone to interpret those words differently. That's because there is a phrase that Jews proclaim during their prayers at the end of Yom Kippur and during the Passover feast that goes, "Ishana haba b'Yerushalayim habnuya," next year in the rebuilt Jerusalem. The phrase was initially coined by 11th century Spanish rabbi Isaac Ibn Giyat, who wrote a poem called Yedidka Me'emesh, which contains the phrase "last year." Last year, when the 242nd Independence Day celebration took place in Tel Aviv, Netanyahu relayed the passage to Friedman, "Ishana haba," next year in Jerusalem. The rebuilt Jerusalem part refers to the rebuilding of the temple. However, Friedman made a clever play on words by replacing the phrase "Lashana haba," next year, with "Lashana haza," this year. And although he stopped short of saying the rebuilt Jerusalem part, it can be implied by those familiar with the phrase that the natural continuation of that sentence is "in rebuilt Jerusalem." That's because there is no other context for the Hebrew language where the phrase "this year in Jerusalem" or "next year in Jerusalem" is used, aside from the continuation of the phrase which invokes the building of the temple. Therefore, it is entirely plausible that Trump's Israel ambassador David Friedman implied that the third temple will be rebuilt this year in Jerusalem, and right after he said it, he made the Jewish blessing on a glass of wine and drank it, just like you do with the covenant at the Passover Seder. Just 2 days after swinging a 10-pound hammer to inaugurate the Pilgrimage Road archaeological site, Friedman showed no signs of fatigue. During his speech, the ambassador made a compelling connection of America's founding fathers to Jerusalem. The ambassador said, "The Declaration of Independence provided that every human being was created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The notion that essential human rights came from God and not man was a revolutionary concept. It made those rights permanent, undeniable, and immune from the vagaries of politics, not only in the United States but around the world. How did our founding fathers know which rights God considered unalienable? Remember, the Declaration of Independence doesn't say these rights are important. It says these rights are divine. Well, I'm sure many of our founding fathers read John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and other great thinkers, but I'm even more certain that they read the Bible, especially because all of the unalienable rights identified in the Declaration of Independence find their home in the Bible itself. Many believe, and certainly our founding fathers believed, that the word of our Creator is expressed in the Bible, and as recognized by the prophet Isaiah, that word emerged from the city of Jerusalem, as Isaiah said, "Out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem," Friedman proclaimed. To understand this connection between the birth of our nation and the city of Jerusalem is to understand all that has transpired since between Israel and the United States. It is to understand why the Pilgrims risked their lives in the 17th century to reach a new world and establish what many of them referred to as a New Jerusalem, he added. As is the tradition, the event concluded with the fireworks display. There was something that the article didn't mention that I would like to bring up here, and that is that when they say the phrase, "next year in Jerusalem," and yet David Friedman said "this year in Jerusalem," it's referring to the temple being rebuilt and the Messiah coming. And that is extremely significant that it deals with the redemption. Let me just read a little bit about what my Jewish learning said. Apparently my neighbor got a rooster, because this thing is going off every few minutes as I'm recording. What then does it mean for today's Jew to utter the words "next year in Jerusalem" at the end of every Passover Seder? The most straightforward answer is that Jerusalem refers to the future city and its temple rebuilt when the Messiah comes. Most traditional Jews feel quite comfortable expressing this messianic longing at the end of the Seder, just as at the end of each Shabbat. Jews recite the hope that the Messiah should come speedily in our day. And to clarify for Israelis, some traditional Haggadot indicate that those in the Jewish state should replace the phrase with "next year in Jerusalem," the rebuilt, implying a rebuilt temple. Although the phrase itself entered the Haggadah only in the Middle Ages, it resonates thematically with ancient biblical themes of past and future redemption. On the Seder night, each participant has personally experienced the physical redemption at that Red Sea. As the Haggadah says, "For it was not our forefathers alone whom the Holy One redeemed, He redeemed us too with them." And in every generation, every individual must feel as if he or she personally had come out of Egypt. Then, as we end the Seder, we utter this phrase that reaches forward to the coming of the Messiah and to complete spiritual redemption represented by Jerusalem. And so, David Friedman drank the cup of wine, signifying the cup of redemption and the coming of the Messiah. Jews drink 4 cups of wine and then pour a 5th for Elijah. The cup is poured but not yet drunk. Yet the cup of hope is poured every year. Passover is the night for reckless dreams, for visions about what a human being can be, what society can be, what people can be, what history may become. That is the significance of next year in Jerusalem. And it's the Messianic hope that the Messiah will arrive, not next year in Jerusalem, but this year in Jerusalem. Hallelujah. I pray it be so. Wouldn't that be exciting? Wow. What an article, what a thought. What an amazing thing to happen after 2,000 years of the Jewish people being in the diaspora and grieving, wishing to be in Jerusalem, and the rebuilding of the temple so that the Lord could come and dwell in their midst. The Jews have what's called the Messianic clock that was created in the 1700s by the Vilna Gaon. He based his clock on the Bible and other Jewish writings. It came from Genesis, from the creation, whereas 1 year to the Lord is 1,000 years to us. This Messianic clock is 200 years old, and during the diaspora, the Jews would follow this clock that was leading to the Messiah's arrival, and it would give them hope to not give up, to hope in the promise of returning to Jerusalem and having the Messiah come.